Hi, everybody. Okay, so this video, we're going to talk about where photosynthesis actually happens. So we know that plants take in water through their roots and they take carbon dioxide in through the bottoms of their leaves and sunlight through the top, and they take those together in the chloroplasts and do photosynthesis and make sugar and oxygen. And that's where we left off. And now we're going to talk about where that actually takes place within the plant. So I'd like you to imagine that my hand is a leaf. I'm a tree, and I've got some leaves. And that leaf, right, there's the bottom of the leaf and there's the top of the leaf, right? When it sits there, the sun comes in through the top, the carbon dioxide goes in through the bottom. I want you to imagine that I've cut the leaf head on, and we're going to look at it head on from top to bottom at a microscopic level. We're going to look at all the layers that make up that very thin leaf, but there's actually a lot of layers in it. And so we're going to look at a cross section is what they call it. So if you take a look here, we've got the leaf. You can imagine it coming out from the screen, right? That's the top of the leaf. That's the bottom of the leaf. And here's the cut off head-on view. You can see an actual micrograph of that where you have the top of the leaf and the bottom of the leaf. And then there's all the layers in between the top and the bottom. And we're going to look at that head on. So here's a little teeny portion of that. So this is the top of the leaf. And down here is the bottom of the leaf. And everything in between is layers 2, 3, 4, etc. Okay, so we're going to talk about those layers. So keep in mind that the object here is to do photosynthesis. So we're going to have to get light in through the top. We're going to have to get carbon dioxide in through the bottom, and we're going to have to get water to come up from the roots and into the layer where photosynthesis happens. So let's start with the top. Because we have to get light through, it has to be very thin. Otherwise, the light will be blocked. So we have two layers on top. We have the waxy layer and the upper epidermis. They both protect the leaf. The waxy layer is much like a plastic baggie. It keeps the moisture trapped in so the plant doesn't dry out. Because remember, it's hoping that a lot of hot sun is going to be pounding down on this leaf, and we don't want to evaporate all the moisture out and dry it out. So it's got this layer of wax to protect it, and then another single layer on top of that called the upper epidermis. Keep in mind that the word epidermis means skin. And then below that is the main attraction. This is actually the tissue in the leaf that's most important for the leaf's job. The leaf is for photosynthesis, and the tissue within the organ of the leaf that is most essential is the palisade layer. So put a nice star next to that one. That's the palisade layer. That's where most of the photosynthesis happens. We've got a thin layer on top to get the sunlight in. And now we have to look at how the water gets in, right? The water goes in through the roots and travels up through what's called xylem, all the way up the stem and in through the little stem that leads to the leaf, and then in the vein. It's all been traveling in these veins, much like our veins carry blood. Their veins carry water and some organic nutrients. And the water diffuses out and travels through these spaceless cells and spaces and gets to the palisade layer. So we have sunlight pouring in from the top. We've got water diffusing from the veins that came up from the roots. And what do we have left to get into the palisade layer? We have sunlight, and we've got water, carbon dioxide, right? That's the other part. Well, the carbon dioxide, you'll recall, comes in through the bottom, and the bottom is called the lower epidermis, and it's very thin. It's one cell thick, but every once in a while you find holes, which is number 6. So if my hand was a leaf and we tipped it up, we would see a whole bunch of holes all over the bottom. Those holes are what let the carbon dioxide in. They also let oxygen and water out. That's called a stomate. You'll see stoma or stomata in different books and labs. And then, as I said, so the carbon dioxide can come up through there. It passes through this number 8 right here. We'll label that in a moment. But there's a lot of spaces in there. The carbon dioxide can pass up and gets to the palisade layer. Sunlight pours in through the top. Carbon dioxide comes in through the bottom. Water comes up from the roots through the veins. And it all comes together here. And that's where photosynthesis happens. But the problem with the stomates is that when it's hot, water can evaporate right out and it will dry out. And so they have number 7, which are little cells that can close and prevent the water loss. Of course, if they close for a really long time, the leaf won't get carbon dioxide either. So it has to have a balance. Homeostasis has to be reached where the guard cells are open enough to allow carbon dioxide in or oxygen at night when it needs an excess of that for respiration. It has to be open to allow the gases to pass through, but it's also got to close enough to keep the leaf from drying out, because of course it needs water to get in there too, or it can't do photosynthesis. So the guard cells open and close to allow gases through and control the amount of water that leaves by what's called transpiration. And finally, we have that little area here where there's lots of gaps for the carbon dioxide to travel from the bottom of the leaf all the way up to the palisade layer, and that's called the spongy layer. So just quickly, we'll get through all the different functions. The waxy layer protects against water loss. That's that layer on top. We have the upper epidermis that protects the layer that is most important just beneath it, which is the palisade layer. That's where photosynthesis happens. The vein has the tubes called xylem and phloem for transport. Xylem is what transports the water, and phloem carries the food. Together, they're called a vein. The lower epidermis, like the upper epidermis, is for protection, and the stomates let oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out, also allows some water to go, which is why we have guard cells that can open and close to make sure that it doesn't dry out. And this is what an actual microscopic view of the layers looks like. So again, you imagine the leaf coming out at you, and it's been chopped this way. You get a slice that way, and that's what you would see on the microscope. So we have on the upper epidermis, you have these long skinny cells. Those are the palisade layer. You have the spongy layer where there's all the gaps. You've got the lower epidermis, and every once in a while you've got guard cells and stomates amidst the lower epidermis. If this is the leaf and I peeled off the bottom and you looked at it head on, so in other words, if you were looking just at the bottom layer of the leaf, it would look like this. You would see lower epidermis cells. You would see these moon-shaped, half-moon-shaped cells called guard cells, and the little space in between is the stomate that lets the carbon dioxide in and out. Just to recap, there's some terms that come up. The protein is called chlorophyll. You're rarely asked for that. If they're asked for the organelle where photosynthesis happens, it is the chloroplast, right? Those are the things with little discs in them. And the chloroplasts are mainly packed into the layer that of like cells that all do the job of photosynthesis called the palisade layer. And that's why it's considered a tissue, right? So the palisade layer is a tissue. And the tissue of the palisade layer and the spongy layer is another tissue, and the lower epidermis is another, and the upper epidermis is another. All together, you get all these tissues together, you get an organ, which is the leaf. And that is where photosynthesis happens.